He paid for both our coffees and walked out of that diner, and I never took seriously a single word he said for 30 years. That is the thing about the truth. It does not expire while you are ignoring it. It just waits. Most men get warned exactly once about the thing that will cost them everything. Once, by someone who already paid the price, and they nod, and they file it away, and they go back to whatever they were doing. And 30 years later they are sitting alone in a kitchen at 6 in the morning, and the warning comes back word for word, and they finally understand what it meant. I was 37 years old when Walter Pruitt sat across from me in a diner in Cincinnati and tried to hand me the key. I was 67 when I finally understood what the key was for. My name is Harold Voss. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%. Today I am going to be Walter Pruitt for you. The question is whether you are going to do what I did, or something different. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Think about the last 12 months of your life, not in general, specifically. How many decisions did you make by default, not by choice, not by intention, but by simply not deciding, by being too busy or too distracted or too comfortable to choose? So life chose for you. Write that number in the comments right now, just the number. No explanation needed. I will tell you what mine was for most of my 40s, almost all of them. In 1981, Walter Pruitt was 69 years old and I was 37. We had worked together briefly in the late 70s on a project that required precision and patience and the kind of stubborn refusal to accept an inadequate solution that only certain engineers have. Walter had both. He was the kind of man who could look at a problem that everyone else had signed off on and say quietly, "That is not right," and be correct every single time. I liked him immediately. I trusted him the way you trust certain people before they have done anything specific to earn it. Just something in the way they carry themselves that tells you they have already been tested and did not break. He retired the spring before that lunch. His wife of 43 years had passed the previous autumn. He was having breakfast alone at a diner in Cincinnati when I walked past the window and he waved me in. I sat down. We ordered coffee. And then he looked at me across the table and said something I was not prepared for. He said, "Harold, how old are you now?" I said 37. He nodded, the slow, deliberate nod of a man confirming something he already suspected. Then he said, "You are right in the middle of it," I said. "The middle of what?" he said. "The years that decide everything, 35 to 55. Most men waste them entirely. They spend 20 years building things and chasing things and being too busy to notice that the most important decisions of their entire life are being made not by them, but by default, by whatever they did not do, by whoever they stopped paying attention to, by the version of themselves they kept meaning to become and never got around to becoming." I said I thought I was doing all right. He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it for a moment, set it back down. He said, "That is exactly what they all think at 37. I laughed. He did not laugh. He just looked at me with those completely unbothered eyes and said, "I am not trying to frighten you, Harold. I am trying to give you something nobody gave me. Someone sitting across from me at 37 telling me the truth while I still had time to do something with it." Then he paid for both our coffees and left. I thought about that conversation for maybe a week. Then I filed it away. Then I forgot about it entirely. For 30 years I forgot about it. And then I turned 67. I was sitting in my kitchen at 6 in the morning. The house was quiet. Margaret was still asleep. I had a cup of coffee and I was looking out the window at nothing in particular. And it came back, not gradually, all at once, every sentence, the coffee cup he set down, the slow nod, the unbothered eyes, the exact words in the exact order he said them. "You are right in the middle of it." And I understood, not partially. Not in the way you understand something intellectually, Completely. In the way that costs something. Because I was 67 years old and the middle of it was 30 years behind me. And I had spent those 30 years doing exactly what Walter had described: building, chasing, being too busy to notice, making decisions by default instead of by choice. The warning had been accurate in every detail. I had just received it 30 years too late to use it. Here is the first thing Walter was really warning me about: the slow replacement of your actual self with a functional version of yourself. When you are in your 30s and 40s, you are building everything simultaneously: career, family, financial foundation, identity, all of it at once, all of it urgent, all of it demanding the best of what you have every single day. And what happens without announcement is that the building starts to become the whole thing. You stop being a person who is building something. You become the building itself. You forget there was a version of you before the job title, before the mortgage, before the school run and the performance review and the thing on your phone that needs a response. There was a man in there who was curious about things, who wanted to learn things, who had ways he wanted to spend a quiet Saturday morning that had nothing to do with being useful to anyone. That man does not disappear overnight. He just gets quieter every year. Until one day someone asks you what you do for fun and you realize you have not genuinely thought about that question in 11 years. Margaret asked me that in the car once. We were driving somewhere. She just turned and asked me casually what I actually enjoyed when I was not working. I could not answer her. Not because I was embarrassed, because I genuinely did not know. I had been so completely consumed by the building that I had stopped being a person who existed outside of it. That is what Walter was warning me about at 37. That is the thing nobody warns you about before it happens. And I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something directly. If someone asked you right now what you do for fun, not what you do for work, not what your hobbies used to be, what you genuinely enjoy right now in this season of your life, how long would it take you to answer? Write it in the comments. The actual answer, not what you wish it was. What it actually is right now. The second thing Walter was warning me about was the hidden cost of being needed. Men in their 30s and 40s are needed constantly, by their employers, by their children, by their partners, by the mortgage, by the alarm that goes off at 6 every morning because something somewhere needs to happen, and you are the person responsible for making it happen. And being needed feels like meaning. That is the trap. It is not meaning, it is function. And function and meaning feel identical when you are inside them, but they are not the same thing at all. I confused the two for 20 years. I thought that because people needed me, I was living a meaningful life. I thought that being essential at work and reliable at home and present enough as a father meant I was doing it right. What I was actually doing was running a very efficient operation. The operation ran well. Everyone had what they needed. The numbers were good. And somewhere inside the operation was a man who had stopped asking himself what he wanted his life to feel like, not look like, not produce, not what it could be pointed to as evidence of, what it actually felt like to be inside it. Walter had answered that question for himself too late. 40 years of work, 3 years of retirement, then gone. I answered it at 67 sitting in my kitchen. Better than Walter, not as good as 37. The third thing Walter was warning me about was the someday problem. I have talked about postponing in other videos, but this is different. Most men in their 30s and 40s carry a version of their real life somewhere in the future. Not as a plan, as a background assumption. A quiet belief that the life they actually want is waiting on the other side of enough. Enough money, enough security, enough time, enough of whatever is currently not quite enough. Someday I will slow down. Someday I will take the trip. Someday I will figure out who I am when I am not working. Someday is not a plan. Someday is a story you tell yourself so that today feels like a temporary condition rather than your actual life. I carried someday for 30 years. When I retired at 64, I was finally ready to live the life I had been postponing. And I discovered something that nobody had warned me about. The life I had postponed had not been waiting for me. It had moved on. Margaret was not the same woman who had wanted to go to Italy at 39. She was 63 and tired in ways that had nothing to do with a lack of adventure. David was not a boy who needed his father to show up. He was a 50-year-old man with his own life built almost entirely around my absence during the years I was too busy to show up. The someday life was not there when I arrived. I had missed it by decades. And here is what nobody tells you about missing it. It is not a single moment of realization. It is not a breakdown or a crisis or a dramatic confrontation with the truth. It is quieter than that. It is a Tuesday evening in your mid-60s when you finally have the time you always said you needed, and you look around and realize you do not know what to do with it. The kids do not need you the way they used to. Margaret has built a life inside the margins of your absence that is full and rich and does not have a gap shaped like you in it anymore. The work that defined you for 40 years is finished. The alarm does not go off, and you are sitting in a house full of everything you worked for, alone with the quiet. That quiet is the sound of the someday life that moved on without you. It is not unbearable. I want to be honest about that. I survived it. I found my way into something real in the years that followed. Margaret and I built something better in the last decade of her life than we had in the 30 years before it. But I had to grieve the someday life first. I had to sit with the fact that the version of Harold Voss I had been saving for later had aged out of certain things. That certain doors were closed not dramatically, but simply by the passage of time. That is what I want you to hear above everything else today. The someday version of you is aging right now while you wait. He does not stay young and ready while you get your affairs in order. He ages with you. And some of what he was going to do becomes impossible not because life stops you, but because the window closes so gradually you never noticed it closing. I want to tell you one last thing about Walter before I finish. 3 years after that breakfast in Cincinnati, I heard through a mutual contact that Walter had died. Quietly. In his sleep. In the house he had shared with his wife for 43 years. 72 years old. 3 years of retirement after 40 years of work. 3 years. I think about what Walter was really giving me across that table. Not a warning exactly. More like a key. A key he had found too late to use himself and was trying to pass to someone young enough to still open something with it. I did not use the key at 37. I used it eventually. Later than I should have. Earlier than Walter. You still have the key in your hand. And here is the question I want to leave you with today. Not what you are going to do with it. Just whether you can feel it. Whether somewhere underneath the building and the function and the someday and the efficient operation there is still a version of you that knows exactly what door it opens. I think there is. I think you felt it when I described it. I think Walter would be glad someone finally used what he tried to give away in a diner in Cincinnati in 1981.